This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good morning, everyone. B'shus the Rashi Kollel, Rav Minster, Rabbi Heinemann, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share some words with you. I want to thank Yedidi Rabbi Alt and the Gulf Manor Synagogue for bringing me into Cincinnati this weekend. So, to speak to B'nai Torah, Kollel, it's great zchus. You know, you're coming into the city. This is the heart of the city. This is where all the vitality is being pumped into the community. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu should give you all siyata d'shmaya and gezind to continue on Yavos HaKodesh lahagdol Torah l'adira. So I want to speak about an interesting Indian, Masechta Megillah. The Gemara says in Masechta Megillah on Daf Daled, Am Rabbi Shua ben Levi, Chayiv Adam Likor says Megillah b'layla shnoisa b'yom. That person's obligated to read the Megillah in the nighttime, u'l'shnoisa b'yom. U'l'shnoisa. Shenemar Elaikai Ekra Yoimam V'Loisanev V'Layla V'Loidu Miyoli. I call out during the day and you don't answer, and the night and there's no respite. That's the source that there's Mikra Megillah not only during the day but in the night also. By the way, Stam, there's a very amazing sugya regarding Mikra Megillah B'Layla. Is Mikra Megillah B'Layla Midivrei Neviim or is it only Midrabanan? We know that the mitzvah Mikra Megillah is the mitzvah Midivrei Soifrim. The Mishnah Berurah even brings down from the Pri Megadim. Let's say somebody's masupik if they read the Megillah or not. So Mishnah Berurah brings down Pri Megadim, you'd have to read it again. Why? I sabik d'Rabbanan l'kula. It's not a d'Rabbanan. It's Midivrei Soifrim. However, the Shagasari and Turei Even says that Mikra Megillah at night is not Midivrei Soifrim. It's Midrabanan. And therefore, if you're masupik whether you read the Megillah at night, sabik d'Rabbanan l'kula. There are many, many nafkaminas between Mikra Megillah b'yom u'v'layla. Not everybody, some poskim hold Mikra Megillah at night is also midivrei seifrim, but Pashtus is it's midrabanan. The Ran goes so far as to say that when the Kfarim advanced the reading of the Megillah to the previous Monday or Thursday, the Ran says that's only b'yom. They never said you have to. They don't read it at night. The Kfarim don't read it at night. The Rabbanan were Masakin, Mikra Megillah at night. They're only Masakin to the Ayaris Kedos, not to the Kfarim. There are many, many nafkaminas. That's not what I'm going to speak about today. So the Gemara said you have to read it during the day. U'l'shenoisa b'yom. So the Gemara says, "Savar minei lemikre b'laylo lemisnem asnisim dida b'yamama." The Gemara has a havamina. What that means is you read the Megillah in the night. During the night, and then you learn the Mishnayos during the day. That's the Gemara's havamina. Havamina is a very big thing. You know, Havamina is very big. This whole there's a minhag that there are those who don't say Tachnon on the 16th and the 17th because I had a Havamina that maybe you could lay in the Megillah on the 16th and the 17th. But the Gemara has a Havamina. What's the mitzvah Mikra Megillah? You read the Megillah in the night and you learn the Mishnah during the day. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah. No, that's not what it means. V'lashnoisa doesn't mean the Mishnayos. Ever parshasadav asne. Asne means to repeat. So you read it twice. You read it during the night, and then you do it again during the day. But the Gemara had a havamina that the mitzvah Mikra Megillah is you learn Mishnah Masechta Megillah during the day. A hafla of a fella. Can you imagine? You come, everybody comes to the shul Purim morning in costumes, and Megillah Nikres, B'yad Aleph, B'yad Beis, B'yad Gimel, B'yad Dad, Loi Pachais, V'loi Yoser. That's the Gemara's Havamina. The Gemara says, no, that's not what it means. What's the Havamina? Really? You would be Mechuyev? I mean, is there a Chiyuv to say Masechta Psachim on Pesach? Is there a Chiyuv to say Masechta Rosh Hashanah on Rosh Hashanah? Is there a Chiyuv to learn any Masechta? There's never a Chiyuv ever to learn a particular Mishnah or Mishnayos, and the Gemara has a Havamina that there's a Chiyuv midivrei Neviim. There's a Pella. A Chiyuv midivrei Neviim to learn Mishnayos. The Mishnayos didn't even come yet. There's a Chiyuv midivrei Neviim to learn Mishnayos. Okay, listen to this Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi darshans on the pasuk V'zichram la Yosef mizaram. It says, V'mei hapurim ha'ela la yavram mitay haYehudim, v'zichram la Yosef mizaram, says the Yerushalmi, v'zichram la Yosef mizaram, mikan shekavu la chachamim meseches. We learn out from the words v'zichram la Yosef mizaram that from here Chazal see there must be Masechta Megillah. We darshan from a pasuk. There must be Masechta Megillah. Is there any other Masechta in Shas that we could darshan from a pasuk? There must be a certain Masechta. There's not one Masechta in Shas that there's a drasha in Chazal. There has to be a certain Masechta. Avada, there has to be Masechta Shabbos, otherwise we wouldn't know what Shabbos is. There has to be Rosh Hashanah, otherwise we wouldn't know how to blow shofar. But that the Torah Shebechsav should say that there must be Torah Shebal Peh, it does not exist except for Masechta Megillah. So there's a famous Vilna Gaon, and I'm going to share with you one version of it. Maybe it should be a shmira. I'm going to share with you the manuscript of the Gra found in Moscow. Okay, there are many different versions of this Gra. I'll share with you the Moscow manuscript, the version brought by Rav David Cohen, Rosh Yeshiva of Hebron, who's probably the world's biggest baki in Kisvei HaGra. The Gra says as follows: Megillah Nikres b'yud Aleph, b'yud Beis, b'yud Gimel, b'yud Daled, b'Tes Vav. Says the Gaon, this is a remez nifla. Add up 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. 11 and 12 is 23. 13 is 36. 14 is 50. 15, 65. Megillah Nikres b'65. Loi pachos v'lo yoser means, because it's a pellet. Rashi says, Megillah Nikres Aleph, Loi pachos v'lo yoser, says Rashi, Pa'amim bazeh u'pa'amim bazeh on the words Megillah Nikres. What does the Mishnah mean? Loi pachos v'lo yoser, not less and not more. It's not less and not more. It should say loi koidem v'lo achar. Why not less and not more? Says the Gaon, it's a remez. Megillah Nikres 11, 12, 13, 14 with 65, but not earlier and later. Not 10 and 16. What's 10 and 16? Shem Havaya. That's the Mishnah saying Hashem's name is not in the Megillah. Loi pachos v'lo yoser, not 10 and 16. HaKadosh Baruch Hu's name is not in the Megillah. But what is it? What is Megillah Nikres? 65. Aleph Daled Nun Yud is 65. So we read the Megillah with Aleph Daled Nun Yud. Megillah Nikres, Yud Aleph, Yud Beis, Yud Gimel, Yud Daled, Tes Vav. Loi pachos v'lo yoser, there's no Shem Havaya in the Megillah. So the Gra in the Moscow edition, he says that the Megillah is Nikres b'Shem Aleph Daled Nun Yud, 65. But it's not Nikres Pachos v'Yoser 10 plus 16, which is Shem Havaya. So the obvious question is, but the Megillah does not only does the Megillah not have the Shem Havaya, it doesn't have the Shem Adnos either. And the answer to that is that Chazal tell us that whenever it says Melech Stam, it's a reference to Hashem's name. But we know Adnos, the name Adnos is Malchus. Adnos is Malchus. The midah of Malchus is expressed with Adnos. So when the Mishnah says Megillah Nikres, b'yud Aleph, b'yud Beis, b'yud Gimel, b'yud Daled, b'Tes Vav, that's 65. That means the Megillah is Nikres be'Adnos. We're Melech. But Loi pachos v'lo yoser, you don't have the Shem Havaya in the Megillah. So let's try to explain Lefi Arkenu Umadrugasenu, what is the difference between the Shem Adnos and the Shem Havaya? The very interesting Rambam is found in Hilchos Avodah Zarah, Parak Beis, Halacha Zayin. The Rambam is talking about Megadef. Don't try this at home or anywhere, or even not at home. But the Rambam says, what is a Megadef? One would have to say the Shem Havaya, Yud Kei Vav Kei, and then be Mekalel with one of the Sheva Shema She'enam Nimchakim. So you have to be Noikev Shem Havaya, and then after you say, you're Mekalel with one of the 7 names on the Shem Havaya. Says the Rambam, what if you said the Shem Aleph Daled Nun Yud instead of the Shem Havaya, and then you're you're Makala with one of the other names. Says the Rambam, no, Davka the Shem Havaya. And then the Rambam says, V'yesh Mishem Afarish, that also the Shem Aleph Dal Nun Yud. Va'ani oimer she'al shneim hu niskal. There's a very rare Rambam. Usually the Rambam just codifies a halacha. The Rambam says, do A, do B, don't do C. The Rambam usually doesn't bring down different opinions and is machriya. Here the Rambam brings down two different deyos, whether one is megadef even with the Shem Aleph Dal Nun Yud or only with the Shem Havaya. And the Rambam says in his opinion, if you say either name of Hashem, it's considered Noikev Shem Hashem, and if you're Mekalel, so then the halacha is you're considered a Megadev. What's the shaila of the Rambam? The shaila of the Rambam, says the Brisker Rav, is what is the relationship between the Shem Havaya and the Shem Adnos? Is Hashem's name the Shem Havaya? It's just that we can't say the Shem Havaya, so we have a substitute, and the substitute is the Shem Adnos. And in that case, the Shem Adnos is not Hashem's name. And in that case, if you say the Shem Adnos and you're Mekalel, so then you're not a Megadev. The Brisker Rav says it's not the Pshat. The Rambam holds that, it's not the Pshat, it's a Kri and a Ksiv. It says Yud Kei Vav Kei, and we read it, but we don't read what it's written. We pronounce it Aleph Dalet Nun Yud. It's not a Kri and a Ksiv. It's that the way to read Yud Kei Vav Kei is Aleph Dalet Nun Yud. It's not the Pshat like it says one word and we have a Messiah read a different word. There are many Kri and Ksivs in the Torah. Nara, or Tchayrim, or whatever it is, where it says A and you read it B. The tradition is you write it one way and you read a different word. No, the Rambam holds. If that would be the case, then if you pronounce Aleph Dalet Nun Yud and you cursed it, Chas v'Shalom, then you would not be a Megadev. That's the shita of some Rishonim. The Rambam holds the way to pronounce Yud Kei Vav Kei is Aleph Dalet Nun Yud. That's the way to read those letters. It's not a Kri and a Ksiv. Kri and a Ksiv, it says one and you read it something else. This is the way to read the words Yud Kei, and therefore if somebody says Aleph Dalet Nun Yud, which is the way you read Yud Kei Vav Kei, that's a Megadev.
Maybe for Balkira, does he have to read? Does he have to be staring at the word when he says Adai? Is he reading it, or can he?
Interesting.
Look at the person speak out. Based
Yeah.
On
Very good.
Meaning the same Asera that tells us Aleph is A, Beis is Be, Gimel is Gil. So when it comes to Shem Adnos, it's different. But then we have to read it inside. Your eyes have to be looking at.
Very good.
Or could you look out?
Right. If it's a Kri Ksiv, so it's Tar Shabbat Peh. Right. So it's not necessarily Tar Shabbat. The Tar Shabbat Peh says that's the Tar Shabbat Chsav over here. Okay. Now, the Svarim tell us, the Gemara brings down, that the gematria of Aleph Dalet Nun Yud 65 is Heichal. Heichal. The Shem Adnos is the Heichal of the Shem Havaya. In other words, Hashem's name is Ki Yada Keska, is not really recognized. We don't really fully recognize the Shem Havaya in its raw form. It needs a vehicle. It needs some kind of medium for us to be able to recognize Hashem's essence. In other words, Hashem's essence, Bizman Hazeh, is beyond our grasp. It needs, in other words, let's say a king is coming into a city and he's in the carriage. So you don't see the king. The king never comes out. You never saw his face. But the carriage, so to speak, is a display of the greatness of the king. While the carriage is going through the city, you have a recognition that of the greatness of the king. You never saw him in his actual raw form, but it's the vehicle with which the greatness of the king is displayed. That's the relationship between the Shem Adnos and the Shem Havaya. Havaya is, so to speak, the essence, and the Adnos is the vehicle with which the Heichal of the Melech, the carriage of the king, the palace of the king. That's the relationship between the Shem Adnos and the Shem Havaya. So, to cut to the chase, we have two halakim of Torah. We have Torah Shebachsav, and we have Torah Shebal Peh. And amazingly, and this is not something that I would have known on my own, Which Torah corresponds to the Shem Havaya, and which Torah corresponds to the Shem Adnas? I don't know, beats me. The Gra, this is printed in a Kovetz Tzvunais of one of the manuscripts of the Gra. The Gra says that the Shem Havaya is 26. That corresponds to the 26 books of Tanakh. See, but the only thing is, we just learned last week, Vayitein Moshe k'chalei sodaber imay ma kala miskashetes b'chav daled kishutin av tamid chacham tzarich liyas baki b'chav daled svarim. So the Gra says plus anoichi v'lo yeh. So the Gra says that the Shem Havaya is Torah shebechsav, 26 books of Tanakh. The Torah Shebal Peh, how many Masechtos are there? Says the Gaon, Tzarich liyos gas bahem. The remez is, the Smag says a remez. Tzarich liyos gas bahem. You have to be familiar with the Torah. Tzarich liyos gas bahem. However, that's if you count Baba Kamba Mitziyam Baba as one Masechta. But if you count as 3 different Masechtas, how many Masechtas in Shas? 65 Masechtas Keneged the Shem Adnos. So the Torah Shebal Peh is the Shem Adnos. The Torah Shebechsav is the Shem Havaya. That's Oyam B'Noira. That's that's why it's worth the price of admission. Torah Shebechsav is the Shem Havaya. Torah Shebal Peh is the Shem Adnos. Carrying the mashal out, that the Shem Havaya, so to speak, is like the essence, and the Shem Adnos is the heichal and the vehicle with which Hashem's essence is apparent. So it's the same thing with the Torah Shebechsav and the Torah Shebal Peh. The Torah Shebechsav is the blatant, raw Ratzain Hashem, but we can't relate to it, we can't understand it, we can't comprehend it without a heichal, without a vehicle, without the way that Hashem is recognized to us through the medium of the Torah Shebal Peh. So the Shem Havaya is the essence, the Shem Adnos is the heichal. The Torah Shebechsav is the essence, the Torah Shebal Peh is the vehicle. Now, the Rambam says all the Svarim of the Nevi'im and all the Ksuvim will become batal imais HaMashiach except for Chamisha Chumshei Torah, Megillas Esther, and Torah Shebal Peh. You hear this? Says the Rambam, Kol Sifrei Nevi'im Asidin Li Batel. This is Hilchos Megillah Parak Beis Halacha Yerches Limais HaMashiach Chutz Megillas Esther. Harehi kayemes kechamisha chumshei Torah uketorah Shebal Peh she'einu b'telim la'olam. You hear the Rambam? The Rambam says Megillas Esther will never be batel like the Torah Shebal Peh. Shenemar v'mei Purim eileh lo yavru v'zichram lo yosef mizaram. The Rambam darshins from v'zichram lo yosef mizaram. Megillas Esther will never be batel. So Brisker Rav says, where does the Rambam see in the pasuk v'zichram lo yosef mizaram that Megillas Esther is like Torah Shebal Peh and will never be batal? It just says v'zichram la Yosef mizaram. Says the Brisker Rav, well, if the Yushalmi darshins from v'zichram la Yosef mizaram that there has to be a Masechta Megillah, that means Megillah is like Torah Shebal Peh, so therefore the Rambam says that Megillas Esther will never be batal like like Torah Shebal Peh, because the words V'zichram Lo Yosef Mizaram are saying there must be Masechta Megillah, which means Megillah Esther is different than all the Sifrei Tanakh. All the Sifrei Tanakh are only Torah Shebechsav. There's one book in the Tanakh which is itself a Geder of Torah Shebal Peh, which is Megillas Esther. Like it says V'zichram Lo Yosef Mizaram, from which we learn there must be a Masechta. And if there must be a Masechta, then Eina Asin Li Batal La'olam, like Torah Shebal Peh. Why do you think there's only one book in Tanakh and one Yom Tov that has to have a Masechta? Why do you think that is? Shabbos doesn't have to have a Masechta. Rosh Hashanah doesn't have the Masechta. Yuma doesn't have the Masechta. Pesachim doesn't have the Masechta. Why is Megillah the only subject that has to have a Masechta? There are 2 chalakim in Torah. There's the Shem Havaya Chelek, which is the Torah Shebechsav, and there's the Shem Adnos Chelek, which is the Torah Shebal Peh. So why in the world would any book of Torah Shebechsav have to have a Masechta? It's the Shem Havaya. It's the Ruah, Ratzain Hashem. Well, why would it have to have a Masechta? Look, they all say Hashem's name in it. So it's Torah Shebechsav. It's the Shem Havaya. But there's one book in Tanakh, Megillah Nikres, B'Yud Aleph, B'Yud Beis, B'Yud Gimel, B'Yud Al, B'Tes Vav. It's Nikres with the Shem Adnos. It's not Nikres B'Shem Havaya. There's one book in Tanakh which by its very essence doesn't have the Shem Havaya. It only has the Shem Adnos. It only is the Heichal. It only is conveyed through the medium of a Heichal, and that's the Megillah. The Megillah is different than all of other Torah Shebechsav. All other Torah Shebechsav, we know what it is. It's pure Torah Shebechsav. It's Shem Havaya. God's name is in every other book of Tanakh. And therefore, it doesn't have to, by definition, have a Masechta. But the Megillah doesn't have Hashem's name because it's loy pachos loy yoser. You can't say the Shem Havaya in the Megillah. It's by definition the Shem Adnos. So by definition it has to have Torah Shebal Peh. The whole essence of the Megillah is that it's not conveyed in the regular way that all the books of Tanakh are conveyed. All the other books of Tanakh are conveyed as Torah Shebechsav, but the Megillah doesn't have the Shem Havaya. It only has Melech, Malchus, Adnos, and therefore it must have a Masechta. And you ready for the Gemara's Havamina? Therefore, says Rav David Cohen, Shiva of Hebron, that the Havamina of the Gemara is, Im Kain, if the very fabric and the very definition of Megillas Esther is its Nikres B'Shem Adnos, it's Nikres B'Shem Adnos means that's the way it's given over to us, it's nimsar to us, it's transmitted to us, it's revealed to us through the Aleph Daled Nun Yud, as part of the 65 Masechtas, as it's legislated. All the other books, whatever that means, they'll become bato, whatever that means. Of course, even Kutzah Shal Yod will never become bato, but whatever that means, its relevance, its significance will pale to a degree. But Megillas Esther, by its fabric, is Torah Shebal Peh. It's interesting, Reb Tzadok HaKohen says that Megillas Esther was the bridge between Torah Shebechsav and Torah Shebal Peh. He says it's the last of all the Sifrei Tanakh. Even though the Navi Malachi technically is the last of the books, but that's why, Esther, there's a big machlokes. Is it part of Tanakh? Is it not part of Tanakh? I'll tell you a chiddush, an interesting chiddush. Don't tell anybody. You'll tell me if you like it or not. There's machlokes in the Gemara whether Esther is Metamis Hayadayim. What's the machlokes based on? Whether Esther is part of Tanakh or not. According to some opinions, according to Shmuel, it's not Metamis Hayadayim. It's not part of Tanakh. According to Shittas in the Gemara, there are only 23 books in Tanakh. But we paskin that it is part of Tanakh. The other opinion is, no, Nitain likrois v'lei nitain likasev. It's given to read on Purim. There's an opinion in the Gemara, the only thing about Megillas Esther is that you read it on Purim, but it's not part of the Torah. The other Shita is, no, it is part of Tanakh. So the famous question, the Gemara says, Mevatlin Talmud Torah Uban Lishmai Mikra Megillah. So, Umata Bebei Midrasha, they ask in the Olam HaYeshivas, what does the Gemara mean? Mevatlin Talmud Torah Uban Lishmai Mikra Megillah. It's not Bittul Torah. Why is it Bittul Torah? You're learning Torah Hashem. It's Torah like anything else. Avnei Nezer writes, every Talmud Chacham has to be baki in every word of Tanakh like anything else. So why is it Bittul Torah? That's a famous question. The Aruch HaShulchan says it's Bittul Torah because by the time everybody gets around and comes into the Beis HaKnesses and the party snappers stop falling on the floor and you could finally start the Megillah, you lost a few moments and all that downtime is Bittul Torah. Or Reb Shlomo Kluger says it's Torah, but you're just reading the words. If you could be learning, Ba'amelis or Biyagia, that's a higher level learning. So it's what we call in the yeshiva world, it's Bittul Torah be'echos, right? It's qualitative Bittul Torah, which, by the way, is a very challenging concept. That means a person could be learning a whole seder, and Chazal would stamp it Bittul Torah. Why? Because you could be learning better. You could be learning deeper. In accordance with your ability, you're not exhausting ad sheyadai magas. What is that called? What is it called when you learn, but it's not ad sheyad chamagas? It's called Bittul Torah. It's not called you're learning, you could be doing better. No, it's called Bittul Torah. Anyway, sorry. The Beis Ephraim has a very controversial answer to this question. The Avnei Nezer disagrees with it very vehemently, but the Beis Ephraim's answer to the question is, why is it Bittul Torah? Says the Beis Ephraim that even the Shita that Esther is Metame Seyadayim and it's part of Tanakh, but just like there's a Shita that Bechlal it's not part of Tanakh and it's only written down to read on Purim, even the Shita that it is part of Tanakh, they hold it's only part of Tanakh twice a year when you're reading it on Purim. But the next day, it's not part of Tanakh. It's only Torah, legabe Kriyas HaMegillah, but legabe anything else, it's not Torah. That's the shita of the Beis Ephraim. Look it up. The Avnei Nezer says he doesn't believe it's tzaddik like Rav Ephraim Zarmagos would ever say such a thing. That means all the drashas in Masechta Megillah, they're all bittul Torah because it's not Torah legabe drash, it's only Torah legabe reading it on Purim. But that's what the Beis Ephraim says. Lefi the Beis Ephraim, I have a kasha on Masechta Megillah, I never found a good answer. The Gemara brings Yud Aleph on Beis, Yud Aleph on Aleph. Rav Nachum Bar Yitzchak, Pasach La Pischalai Parshas Mehacha. Right? The Gemara brings about 12 different intros that different Amoraim gave to Masechta Megillah. That they would start the Megillah with a pasuk in Divrei Hayamim. They would start the Megillah with the pasuk in the Teichacha. They would start the Megillah with something from somewhere else. Well, is the Megillah not rich enough that you could start talking about the Megillah by talking about the Megillah? I'm saying most people, they would rather you start talking about anything else by talking about the Megillah. No, when it comes to Megillah, we're going to start about saying if you're a Maggid Shir and you have a shir about the Megillah, the last thing you want to do is start with a pasuk in Divrei Hayamim. That's not necessary. I would not, if you're for aspiring Rabbanim out there, I would not recommend giving a Purim shir by starting with the Teichacha. That's not a recipe for a successful shir. Just the opposite. If you have a shir on the Teichacha, so why are they all starting elsewhere? Could it be, according to the Beis Ephraim, because the Beis Ephraim holds that the Megillah is not Torah? That's what the Beis Ephraim said. It's only Torah, it's only Tanakh, legabe reading it on Purim. If you're giving a shir, like the Avnei Nezer says, so all these Amoraim, they wasted their time in Masech Megillah. No, that's Kufa why the Gemara says, Pasach la Pischa la Hai Parshas Meyacha. They're saying Pshat and Divrei Hayomim. Now, whatever you use to say Pshat and Divrei Hayomim is now incorporated in Torah through the back door that the Pesach la Pischa la Hai Parshas Meyacha. That would only work out according to the Beis Ephraim. Again, Beis Ephraim is a very big chiddush. Avnei Nezer does not agree with it, but Lefi the Beis Ephraim, maybe it would be a mahalach why they started elsewhere. Anyway, back to the ranch. So the hisgalus of Masechta of the Yom Tov of Purim is different than any other revelation. All other Yomim Tovim are nikreis b'shem havaya, and therefore they're strictly Torah shebechsav. And avada, there has to be Torah shebal peh, because the Torah is Torah shebechsav and Torah shebal peh. But the Torah shebechsav doesn't require that there should be Torah shebal peh. But comes the Megillah, and the Megillah is nikreis leipachas v'leyoser. There is no inherent element of shem havaya in the Megillah. It's only the shem adnos, and therefore the Gemara darshans mikan shekavu lahem chachamim mesechta. And therefore, says Rav David Cohen, we now understand why the Gemara has a havamina that the way to read the Megillah is in the night you read the Torah Shebechsav, and the full mitzvah of Kriyas HaMegillah perhaps cannot be fulfilled unless you learn the Mishnayos of Masechta Megillah during the day. Now, we don't hold that way. It was only a havamina. But that would be the hezber and the havamina, and that would certainly explain why it's darshaned from the Megillah itself requires that there be a Masechta Megillah. And as we know, the minhag Chassam Sofer was before Purim every year. He would learn Masechta Megillah. I think he had a certain Seder. I think maybe he started the Gemaras relevant to Purim on Purim. But Chassam Sofer brings down minhag Chassam Sofer was to learn Masechta Megillah Purim time. We don't need very deep reasons why the Chassam Sofer did that, but lefi this approach, we learn that Masechta Megillah is not just it's the Masechta that is the appropriate Masechta come Purim time, but it's more fundamental to the Yom Tov of Purim than perhaps other Masechtas are to their respective Yomim Tovim. So, I appreciate the opportunity to share with Chashav B'nai Torah just lefilpul ulchedude, and wish you all bracha v'atzlacha, and siyata d'shmaya v'chol tov salah. Thank you very much.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.